Right, folks. Okay, so today's session is about kind of getting you ready to lift your animation skills to the next level, kind of take it up a little bit. And it's going to use a range of tools. It's going to use a range of different kind of techniques and processes. I am well aware that you are animation arts, and I'm hoping not, but it's entirely possible that asking you to open Maya may have sent off an ever so slight flag in the back of your brain. Why is this man asking me to open a thing that I've made a clear decision not to open? Trust me, we're going to go with it. It's valuable. This is not about. This is not a software lesson. Put it that way. Okay. This is not about learning a piece of software. This is about developing your skills as animators, particularly as 2D animators. Because this technique I'm going to show you will help you speed up the process of designing and developing performance for your films. Okay, and that's what this is about, just really lifting everything up to a higher level, to a better standard. And the way we're going to do that is actually thinking about the concept and the process of body mechanics and what it actually means for animators. Because I think for my experience of animation is, especially when you're first learning, it's quite hard to distinguish the difference between design and animation, because especially if you're a 2D animator, because the animation process is actually a design process, yeah. Especially if you do hand drawn, or even digital drawn, like pose to pose animation, it is a very design-led process. It's a drawn process. So sometimes separating that from performance and from acting can be quite difficult to do. But that's what we're going to try and do today, is to start thinking about an acted performance and what we actually mean by the concept of body mechanics and where your brains should be when you are animating characters, okay, where your head should be at. So my first question to you, it comes in the form of a fence. So here is a fence. This fence is, I'm going to guess it's just over 6 feet. 6 feet, solid wood, looks really sturdy, quite strong, decent posts. And then it's got these very large boulders kind of resting against it. So it's got like a nice little step up as you get close to the fence. So here is a fence. Here is Jim Carrey as Ace Ventura. And here is James Corden as Smithy. I've got a question for you. Who gets over the fence first in a race? James Corden. Smithy, Jim Carrey as Ace Ventura. You tell me. You've got to animate this. Who gets over the fence first? Why? Because he's fast. Possibly. It's quite clumsy as well, though, isn't it? Like, let's be honest. A lot of what he does is pure luck. Yeah, it just kind of always works out for him. It always kind of goes the way he needs to go. But I think we can agree that he's an idiot. Yeah? He's an idiot. So we've got a fast, lucky idiot. And then we've got James Corden as Smithy. Is he fast? Would you consider his character designed there to be a fast-looking character? No. Is he driven? Yeah. He's quite an aggressive, kind of very clear-cut character. He knows what he likes, he knows what he doesn't like. So we've got a bumbling, lucky, nimble person, and we've got a slower, larger, but very determined person. So let's go back to the question again. Who gets over the fence first? The lucky, nimble one, or the bigger, determined, aggressive one? And how do they get over? Could either of these people jump this fence? No? So if you animated Smithy just running up and just full-on somersault vault over the top of the fence, would that be believable? Possibly not. What if Ace Ventura did it? I think it'd be more believable. I think if you just saw him just somersault over and kind of land, and then the monkey lands on his shoulder, you'd buy it. You'd be like, yeah, okay, this is in fitting with this character. But this kind of decision making, just thinking about, well, I've got two characters that have different designs with a similar obstruction to get through, this is where we have to start thinking about body mechanics. We have to start looking at how the design of a character and their construction has implications for their performance. Yeah, who they are directly impacts what they can do. Okay, and that's where we need to start thinking, because actually this is one of the biggest kind of standout problems with substandard animation. Actually, is when you look at something, you think it's off or it doesn't quite work right. Yes, normally it's lighting and rigging, but then body mechanics is kind of the next thing that we spot as not being quite correct. A performance is too elastic or too light. That's the one that we see most often, actually. When large objects move too quickly, they move too fast, and they don't have an implication of weight to them, that's bad body mechanics. So that's what we're going to start thinking about today, is how can we actually design good body mechanics, and how do we recognize those body mechanics? And we're going to use a couple of, I've given you some resources, so I'll guide you to it in a second, but we're going to get some stuff off Moodle in a bit. Before we do that though, let's actually think about what the key components of body mechanics are. So first off, and we've already mentioned this very briefly, body mechanics is the relationship that exists between performance and design. Yeah? How does design impact performance? And how does the required performance structure the design? Yeah, these two things go hand in hand. We think about them together. Then the next part is the calculation of a design's impact on motion and performance. So it's not just saying, my character is nimble and thin and therefore can jump high, but it's actually a calculation of how thin times how strong equals how high. Yeah, actually thinking about like the structure of a character and how that will define the way that character behaves when they are put through a performance process. Now this is extremely difficult to think about, especially in 2D terms, like because your character doesn't exist unless you've drawn them. And then the final one, which again I did just touch on, is this idea of like, how do we make sure that the suspension of disbelief sustains? So when our audience are watching something, however fantastical that is, we want them to suspend their disbelief. We don't want them to dismiss the work. We want them to buy into it. Yeah, because that's where emotive responses come from. When an audience buys into a product, they respond emotively. That's why horror works. Yeah, we respond emotively to the things we see on screen. We feel a sense of fear or tension. But in terms of body mechanics, it's about not just those high-level emotional responses, but also the subtle responses, even just believability, sympathy, yeah, for characters, or empathy for their situation, are really, really important. And there's a lot of techniques that we have to use in animation to ensure that, especially, and this doesn't necessarily apply to you as much, but I still think it's very relevant, especially if we ever start to combine live action or real world capture with animated content. That's when that suspension of disbelief becomes absolutely paramount. We have to believe what we are seeing, otherwise we won't relate to the characters and to the narrative. Okay, so think about even something as basic as like Jurassic Park. You go back to like the original Jurassic Park film and that scenes with the T-Rex. We have to believe not just that those people are in danger, but those people are in danger because that thing is 50 feet tall, yeah, and weighs like 30 tons, 40 tons. Yeah, we have to believe the scale and the size and therefore the threat of that object in order to buy into what's happening in the narrative. So really, really important that we consider that last one. That it's all about suspension of disbelief. Okay, so let's go to actual characters. This is a skeleton. You all have one. Those of you that have started on the session 3 of my digital arts class will know that we did start talking about skeletons actually last week, and looking at that idea of like there's structured, there's elements that are solid and elements that are not solid. Yeah, our body is made up of components, and our skeleton, for the most part, all has similar levels of density throughout. There are some parts of the skeleton that have greater bone density and some that have less, so comparisons can be drawn between, for example, the fingers, the carpals and the tarsals, so the fingers and feet bones, don't have the same density as the cranium or the sternum, for example, so those bones are slightly different, but generally they're all solid. But when it comes to animation and performance, that doesn't mean that the entire skeleton behaves in exactly the same manner. And that's because there's another component in a character's design that defines how they move and behave. So we all have that. Yeah, we've all got this same structure. We are all confined to the abilities almost of this skeletal structure. But we are not confined by our soft tissue matter. So even though we all look like this, some of us look like that, where our bone density actually makes up the proportion of our body's, kind of solid mass. And our muscular and soft tissue density is not the same. We don't carry as much soft tissue as other people. So some people's skeletons, are contained like that. Others like that. It's the same skeleton. It's the exact same skeletal structure underneath. But there is a very distinct difference in how these two characters will move, and how they will behave. Because their soft tissue, not just their skeleton, it has an enormous impact on what their body is able to do and how it is, what ability it has to move. And as a third example, some of us look like that, where we have the same structure, we have the same composition, but our proportions and our scale are different. And that will impact the way we act with real-world objects. So, for example, if we took all three of these characters and we said to them, okay, all three of them, they stand side by side, and in front of all of them, we put a concrete block that weighs 50 kilograms. How are they all going to react to that if we say, right, pick that up? Are they all going to be able to just go, it's 50 kilos, just pick it up like that? Probably not. Okay? So Yama, on the left, will probably just be able to bend forward and go, just lift 50 kilos. Yeah, bend from the hip, so bend forward, pick the block up and lift it in front of him. Fred, probably not so much. Fred's probably going to have to keep his back straight, bend his knees down and lift through his legs and not through his spine, because the weight would be greater than he's probably able to lift. Okay, that's over 100 pounds of weight. That's quite a significant weight to lift up. And then Edna probably can't lift it. Edna probably weighs 50 kilos, actually. In terms of scale, I wouldn't be surprised if she was actually that light. And you can see that in their design. So their ability to react and interact with their environment is actually reflected in their design. So, for example, you look at just isolate single components within them. Look at the width of their shoulders. They all have the same skeleton, remember. They are all the same. They have the same amount of bones. Those bones have the same proportionate relationships to one another. But look at the width of Boss Yama's shoulders against Fred's. It's enormous. He's 4 times the size, maybe 5 times the size, because his muscular density is much greater. Waist as well. I reckon you could get maybe 5 Freds. I reckon you could put Fred inside Boss Yama's stomach. I think you could fold him into it in terms of just mass. And that mass is the same. It's a human mass. The distribution of size. I don't know if you guys know this, that the distribution of space against size is almost the same in all people. So the physical space you occupy, there's a calculation of how much you weigh against the space you occupy. And the only people that buck that trend are bodybuilders, because they increase their muscle density. So they're off. But for the average human, you all occupy the same amount of space against your weight on a linear calculation. So if that's true, Boss Yama probably weighs. If you could roll Fred into a ball and put him inside Boss Yama's stomach, Boss Yama probably weighs 5 Freds. Okay, which means most people can lift 1/5 of their body weight with relative ease. Yeah, we have the strength to lift 1/5 of our body weight. That means that Boss Yama should be able to pick Fred up just like that and just move him. I reckon he could pick Edna up with one hand. Like a crane, just like that, off the head. She only weighs 50 kilos. That's like 10 Boss Yamas. That's 1/10 of his body weight. Okay? That would be like picking up a turkey. You just lift it up, like not even heavy. So these are the things we consider. Yeah, we've all got the same skeleton. We're all humanoid characters are structured internally the same, but that soft tissue changes everything. It completely defines the way that we kind of work together. So when we're designing for animation, we have to think about those. There are two components that exist within those bodies. So think about those three characters we just looked at. They're three different characters, three different sizes, but they're united by the same principles. So there are components of our body, we did talk about this a bit last week, that are rigid. So these don't have flexation. They don't really have much opportunity for manipulation. So our core organ casings. Okay, there are three organs that you absolutely cannot live without under any circumstances. Okay, this one and these two. Yeah, brain, heart, lungs. Everything else you can survive. Not very long, but you can survive without them. But these three are core, and you can see that they're core because they're very protected. Yeah, our rib cage and our sternum, this bone here that protects your heart, is incredibly important. We need that bone. This one as well. The bones that make up our cranium and its surrounding bones, its surrounding architecture, vitally important. So our limb casings, very rigid, can't move. Limb extensions. So what we mean by limb extensions are the points between joints. Okay? So femur, humor, tibia, like those long bones, they're quite rigid. They have to be rigid because they're the bones that hold our muscles in place that allow us to move. Our muscles work because they are anchored to our bones. That's how our body moves. So those bones need to be quite rigid in order to take the pressure of that anchoring. You have things moving up and down. And then finally, the other rigid area is our centre of balance, which seems like a really odd thing, but it's our pelvis. Okay, so that midpoint. This is the human centre of balance. It exists here, which a lot of people don't realise that. Actually, I think a lot of people assume that when characters move, they kind of move from the chest and head. So this moves, and everything else just sort of follows after. And actually, we move from the hip. Everything's from the hip, and that's because we're upright. We're upright creatures. Okay, different animals behave different ways. Animals that are primarily use their front limbs, their forelimbs to mobilize, especially at speed or in an athletic way, their center of gravity is higher up. So for example, chimpanzees, bonobos, even gorillas to an extent, their center of gravity is actually across the chest. Everything exists across the chest. And you can see that in the way that they walk. They lead from this middle point. They either lead over the top of it, extending their arms forward, or they'll lean under it by swinging their legs forward when they run. So their centre of gravity is higher. Ours is on our hips. And because of that, this bit here is not very flexible. It's got loads of rotation built into it, which we'll talk about in a second, but it's not malleable. You can't bend someone's pelvis. Okay, you just don't. It's painful. Yeah, I don't know if anyone's ever broken their pelvis. Painful. So those are our rigid areas. Then we've got our flexible ones. So areas of significant muscle density. It's a really interesting one. So there are some areas in our body which are basically just pure muscle. They're built entirely of muscle. So for example, yes, you've got your extensions. So your forearm, calves, your thighs, so your quadriceps and your hamstring, your really dense bits of muscle. So there's lots of flexibility in how that's defined. So we can create lots of different shapes with those muscles. But the biggest one is actually here in your midriff. So in the middle of your body. You've got this big open gap between your pelvis and your rib cage, and everything in that space are those organs, so liver, kidney, stomach, intestines, all of that junk, is all protected by muscle. Yeah, all the way around it. And it's that area of significant muscle density that is super flexible. The spine even allows for it. Yeah? Your spine allows that part of your body to be super flexible. So that's where we're going to get the most movement in a character. Areas of extreme flexation. So flexion, I say flexation, but yeah, flexion is technically the medical term. So flexion is a single point here. It's not a rotation, it's a single point of movement. So elbow, knee, wrist to an extent. They don't have as much rotation as people think, actually, our wrists. They do have some rotation, but not nearly as much as our hips and our shoulders. Okay? So areas of extreme flexion have lots of fluidity to them, yeah? Our elbows and our knees, lots of movement. And then finally, yeah, areas of extreme rotation. So there we have 5 points of extreme rotation on our body, okay? 2 hips, 2 shoulders, and a neck. Everything else is partial rotation. So our feet, yes, we can rotate our ankles, but not nearly as much as we can rotate our hips. Okay, and our shoulders are probably the most flexible on our body, which is interesting because that's kind of like a evolutionary leftover. We don't even need it anymore, apart from running and eating. That's kind of what we use those shoulders for now. So these are the things when we think about how we design a movement of a character or a performance. We think, okay, so we've got the solid thing underneath, but then when we dump mass on top of that, when we put soft tissue over that skeleton, how we apply that tissue and that mass is going to affect how the rigid bits move, because they'll be held down by weight, and it's going to affect the flexible bits as well, because we're, again, held down by weight, but also restricted by mass. Okay? You know, if you are a larger person, such as myself, you can't bend very well in the middle, not because of the weight of the middle, that you've got more of it, but because it's in the way. It exists. Yeah, so those are the things we have to consider when we're animating, is like, what's that relationship between those rigid and flexible bits? So I'm going to show you some examples of how animators and animation artists have to think about this when they are designing. Yeah, the idea of how something performs is so important. So these are from Bill Schwab. These are some designs from Zootopia, or Zootropolis, whatever you want to call it. And they're great examples of real consideration for the performance of mass. Yeah, how does this character kind of move? Especially as you've got to take a character that is traditionally quadrupedal, yeah, lives on all fours, and you've got to bring it up to be bipedal because they're anthropomorphized, aren't they? They're humanoid characters. But there's some really clever stuff going on here. So, for example, what I think is really interesting is at no point on these characters is the spine straight. On this design, the spine is never straight. It's always got a really intensive arch, especially towards the lower back. So examples here. It's really intensive arch on the lower back. Here as well, even when walking, there's an arch on the lower back. Standing static, an arch on the lower back. And that's because what they're thinking about is, right, so he's a rhino, and rhinos have really large bellies, but what happens to your spine when it has to support the weight of a really large belly? Yeah, your spine can't stay straight. Your belly literally pulls the spine forward, and you have to lean your shoulders back to carry that weight, to hold on to that mass in front of you. Well, what's that going to do to your kind of form? What's that going to do to your body? Well, first off, you're going to want to distribute that weight as evenly as possible. So a good example is if you carry something heavy, don't do this in the building, please, but pick up a heavy object and stand with your feet together. And see how long you can stand holding something heavy like a stack of chairs with your feet together. Then put it down, try again, put your legs apart and lift it up. And you'll find it's much easier to hold a significant weight if you distribute that weight across a wider surface area. Just spreading your feet out across the floor. And you can see that in these designs. His feet are always kind of kept firmly apart because they're to support the weight of that body. The next thing is the arms as well. I find, and they've exaggerated this, what I'm about to talk about, into the neck design. But the idea of the weight of his arms hang low. Like everything's kind of dropped. Like there's no kind of strength almost in his collarbone, his shoulder blade. His arms are hanging quite low, and that's accentuated by the kind of design, the rhino design of the neck. But again, the arms are kind of hanging in this low fashion. Here's a good example. This, like they're not up. They're actually really low down against kind of the position of the cranium up here. And here as well, kind of this idea of really kind of low, staggered arm position. Yes, they're not up and springy, they're always kind of kept kind of low. And when they are lifted, it turns into an exaggerated movement. But again, it's the idea of mass. He doesn't just have arms, he has really big arms that are really heavy. And that impacts the way that character can kind of position themselves. So that's some stuff from Bill Schwab. They're really clever designs, really, really nicely thought out in terms of the mechanics. Here's some stuff from Thorsten Schrank, who's again designer for animation and an illustrator as well. But this is a very, very different character. What we've got here is a character who they need to get lots of performance from him, so thinking about the way that this character is going to behave. But at the same time, the character is designed to not be athletic at all. Okay? We have a tendency with thin characters to assume that thin kind of means like springy and flexible, and that's not always the truth. Fred's a good example as well, actually, that it can also mean kind of weak. Yeah, it means a lack of physical strength and a lack of athleticism, and these are carried in these designs by keeping lots of very, very straight lines. This character, with the exception of this pose here, this character generally avoids bending their legs or extending like their lower limbs at all. They stay very kind of static and very upright, even when performing. Yeah, there's almost no flexibility in the chest. Yeah, all of the flexion and rotation happens just at the hips. There doesn't seem to be any flex in the middle of his body, almost at all. And the only place where there is significant flex is down here, and it looks like a very uncomfortable position. It doesn't look natural. But the rest of the time, the character kind of keeps a relatively smooth spinal structure, no massive curves. Even when he's running, he runs straight. That is not how people run. Okay, we don't run with a straight spine necessarily, not naturally anyway. We actually kind of hunch over. We cut almost into like a ball, actually, when we sprint. Very, very rarely do we naturally run dead straight. So yeah, these designs show that there's consideration here that yes, this character is not heavy, but also not strong. Okay, he's not necessarily a physical character. And these are parts of his personality. His personality is defining that, which we'll talk about in a second. So when we're designing characters, we shouldn't just be designing them to look nice. We should be designing them to live, to be performed, to be animated. And that's one of the big barriers. Is sometimes I know some of you have probably already done this actually. I hope you have, because it's quite a common thing where you design a character that you really like, that you're really confident with and you're happy with their construction, but then you just kind of can't animate them. Like you're not sure how. Like they look great, but there's a gap where you just don't really know how to bring them to life, or how do you convey the personality that you know that character has in movement? How do we bring that across? It becomes a real challenge, and this is the sort of design work that will help you overcome that challenge. You're thinking about performance, thinking about physicality, thinking about that term, body mechanics. How does this character actually behave? So here are the guidelines that we're going to look at today. These are the things we're going to start to carry across. So guidelines for better body mechanics. The first one is demeanor. So the mood or the kind of the state of mind, state of being of the character defines how they move. So, in fact, I put it there that it's the biggest factor in determining their movement and mechanics, how they feel at any given time. Going back, Ace Ventura versus Smithy. Yeah, Ace Ventura is so freewheeling and so lucky that he's got no real sense of aggression or determination most of the time. But by comparison, Smithy is quite an aggressive character, quite forthwith, and that would mean that he'd probably try harder to get over that fence. Yeah, he would put more, initially anyway, in that first attempt, would put more effort into getting over the fence. Think about that. How they feel and their state of being really is the biggest factor in how we define how they move and how they kind of engage with that environment. Then some other stuff. So calm movements are eased movements. Have you all done easing in and easing out? Do you know what I mean by this term? Yeah? Calm movements are eased movements. They start smooth, they end smooth. Whether it's walking or doing what I'm doing at the moment, just gesturing, whether it's going up a set of stairs, whether it's sitting down. A calm sit is an eased one. Okay, there's no tension to it. By comparison, a tense movement is posed and it is sharp. Okay? Calm sit, just sitting down. A tense sit, and a pose, and a pose. So there's difference in that mannerism. With a tense one, you have to have like clear poses, starting, middling, ending, which we'll talk about again in a bit more detail in a second. Angry does not equal big and fast. Okay, and I've got a video example of a clip you've probably seen doing the rounds actually in the last few weeks. Angry does not mean big. Okay? In fact, the best movements, the best mechanics to display anger are quite small ones. Yeah? They're not flailing arms around or throwing things or doing this. If anyone ever does this W shape in a character, you should just be made to leave. It's just the worst thing. People do this all the time. When a character's frustrated, they put their arms like this. Like, no one ever does that. I've never seen anyone do this before. Yeah, and it's not big, so it's not big extended movements. Yeah, it's not like throwing limbs around or anything like that. And it's not fast movements, anger. Anger is an internal feeling. It's slow. It burns inside. Very rarely does it burn outside. So the best way of conveying anger is actually in eased movements with lots of expression, as opposed to big, aggressive mechanics. So the next thing is, right, so if that's their demeanour and kind of how they feel, purpose is the next thing to consider. Like, the narrative defines how a character navigates that scene. Like, what we need to happen in the story will impact how a character then interacts with that story. There are certain things that just have to happen in a narrative. Yeah, uppercasing in the script, going back to that. So purpose can allow characters to break expectation. We need Ace Ventura to get over that fence. So if he just lands in a somersault with a monkey on his head, that's okay, because that's what the narrative needs. We need him to be able to do that. Yeah? If we need, for comedic effect, if we need Smithy not to be able to get over the fence, then that's what happens. Because that's what the narrative requires. Even if physically he's capable of doing it, we prevent it from happening and we remove an action or we remove a mechanic because the narrative requires it. So think about that. Don't just think about, like, here's my character, this is what they look like. Think about, well, what do I actually need them to do? Like, I need to get this character from the bottom of this stair to the top of the stairs, and I need them to get there ready to fight. So how are they going to do that? How are they going to get up that go through that movement and be ready for the next action? So you're thinking about the purpose. So the next one is environment. I think this is a good example of what we call squash and stretch. You know, you've done this, I would assume you've done some squash and stretch stuff, but adverse environments, they allow mechanics to be extended beyond the norm. So if we've got an environment that is extremely difficult for our characters to navigate, they can do things that just aren't possible. Yeah, they're just not going to happen. So, for example, and this doesn't apply to animation, but we see this all the time in live action filmmaking, where you'll see characters who will, like, jump out of windows. If you get thrown through a window, you're probably not going to get up, just from the pain of being thrown through a window. But we see it in action films all the time, where characters sort of launch themselves all over the place, and are absolutely fine, because the narrative needs them to, and the environment allows us to break those traditional norms. Okay, going back to Jurassic Park, the tree climbing scene where they have to climb out of the tree and the car's going to, like, fall on them. No one can climb out of a tree that fast. It's ridiculous, especially with a child on your back. But the film allows it. The film permits that to occur. Okay, and that's what we mean about, like, we use if the environment's adverse, the characters can kind of behave outside of the norm because we just need them to. Good examples in animation are, like, if you've got strong winds, like people getting blown away. Never happens. You'd need like 100-mile-an-hour wind to blow a human over, and even then, most people would just bend their knees and be okay. But for the purposes of animation, we can do that. We can have them kind of, do that. We can have the other thing that we do as well. Adverse environments. If we have large characters fall down, they sort of flatten. They just sort of kind of like flatten into the floor and then return to normal mass. That's not normal. People bounce. They would actually just bounce up. So, it's those kind of things where we have big actions or big events. If the environment allows it, we can go beyond. And again, need. Like, if the environment needs to have a certain element within it and our character needs to react to that, then we break those norms. Yeah, if the environment needs a certain thing to happen, then that's what we do. So a joke, again, if you've got to deliver a joke or a message, then do it. Like, if the character needs to deliver a punchline and it requires a mechanic that's slightly abnormal, do it. And, like, for example, Wile E. Coyote, every episode, there's a point in time where Wile E. Coyote defies the laws of physics. Yeah, when he runs off the side of the cliff and just doesn't fall and just holds it for a moment. Because the joke requires that he reacts to the fact that he's about to fall. Yeah, the joke needs him not to fall, so the mechanics are adapted, they're changed. Looney Tunes, actually, Warner Brothers Animation are very good at that, historically very good at that defying norm and using the characters to make sure that a narrative or a punchline is told effectively. I really love the ones where they kind of paint, like they'll paint a tunnel and then it will be a painting and then it will be a tunnel. That kind of stuff. If you can do that, that's fine. And the character's mechanics will obviously adapt to those environmental changes. And then we've got this one, complex and simple lines. This is a really tricky one actually because I want to show you some kind of big examples. So I'm going to do, when we look at complex and simple in a little bit, when I've got you kind of up and running with the task, I'm going to show you what I mean by this in design across a range of examples. So I'm going to show you where to find some good examples as well. If some, like those of you who are not active Pinterest users, I'm going to show you 2 Pinterest accounts you need to follow as animators because they'll help you with this stuff. So these are our kind of basic guidelines. Should we look at some examples of just good body mechanics so we can kind of just firm up what on earth I've talked about for the last 20 odd minutes? So let's have a look at a milk Carl example first. Okay, so this one's interesting because what we've got here is obviously it's our dear Sheriff of Nottingham from Robin Hood. But what's great about his design is he carries so much mass at his centre of gravity that when he steps, so he steps, and his legs aren't solid. So what happens is he steps, his weight follows through, and then he has to do like a weird bounce off of it. And that's where that arm movement comes from. Is he's so heavy that his legs can't actually stabilise his own weight. So he does this step, weight carries me, step off, as opposed to just a normal like step over, just a really clean step. Okay, so if you watch again, you'll see he effectively is bouncing up and down. And what's great about this character as well is that idea of not just weight, but so you've got that kind of mass that he's carrying. But also the reason of the arm swing, yeah, is even though he's quite large in mass, he is not strong. He is not a muscular or athletic design. And that can also be seen in the fact that if you took away the big kind of puffy sleeves that he's rocking, you just removed those and looked at him as an anatomical design, his shoulders are really narrow. Yeah, he's got very, very little going on in the shoulder department compared to the middle mass. Yeah, so compared to like his torso and his waist, which is where most of the weight is carried. So because he's not a muscular character, he's carrying this weight, so he's stepping forward, the weight follows through, and he's bounce up off of it. He's got no strength in his arms, and that's why they're doing this. Yeah, they're literally just, his body is like swinging him back and forth as he steps because he's carrying all that mass. And remember, that mass is being carried at his centre of gravity. Yeah, most of us will never have to deal with this actually at this level, but if all the mass gathers at your centre of gravity, it does affect the way that you move because that's where you balance from, and that's also where you're carrying all that weight. So that's where that motion is coming from. Every time he steps, all that weight carries with him. Yeah, his arms aren't strong enough to hold him in place and stabilise him. Yeah, he doesn't have the muscle to do that, so his arms just swing side to side. So the movement brilliantly complements the design. The two things are going hand in hand. And that's because when he was designed to move that way. Yeah, they wanted a character that walked this way, that was somehow in charge and somehow physically intimidating, but also just completely beatable. Yeah, there's no question about whether Robin Hood could beat the Sheriff of Nottingham, especially in this design, with this design aesthetic in this film. There's no question about whether or not he could beat him in a fight. Of course he could. And that's what we need. We need a villain that's not the true villain, but just an annoyance, a minor obstruction within the narrative. And all of that feeds into this design. All right, I'm going to show you 3 more as well, great examples, as well as the one that inspired me, the one that kind of made me go, oh, I don't think about body mechanics nearly enough. I don't pay it its due. So let's go here. So I'll show you another 2D one, and then I'll show you two 3D ones. So this is some stuff from Tarzan. And again, a great example of effective body mechanics being utilized here. I'll put this on loop, actually. So with this, they're thinking about the mechanics of this character that fed into the design. So before any animation, they were actually thinking about mass. How does this character work in terms of their athleticism? What does that muscle mass do to their body? How does it change the way that they work as a character? And what impact does it have on their performance? So these are some pencil tests, which some of them made it in actually. Some actual line work that made it into the film. But again, it's really thinking, well, if this is how he's designed, and this is how his muscles and his body works, what are his mechanics? How does he function? And what this actually shows is that his muscles are so overdeveloped from the narrative, raised by gorillas and all that. They're so overdeveloped that they actually overpower the core sort of like skeletal structure. The way his skeleton is supposed to work is effectively manipulated. So what that's done is they've taken a character whose body, you think about, sorry that's a bit zoomed in, you look at the shape of his spine, he's upright like a man, but he's carrying his center of gravity at a different point. His gravity doesn't actually carry at his hips like we do. His gravity carries at his chest, because that's implied, it's part of his design, it's part of the narrative. And when he moves, you can see how that weight is carried. So again, I think this is excessive. You don't need to do this, but I can see why they did this for this film, to really understand how a character moves. Yeah, just draw all their muscles. But here's a great example of that kind of movement, where the character, everything is led from here. Like if we got crouched down to see something on the floor, everything starts at the hips. So we'll bend our hips and our knees and our ankles together, and we'll kind of concertina down towards the floor. We'll part our legs slightly, and go into a squat position, and then we'll bend our spine will bend over to look to the ground. Okay, and that's a natural human motion. Everything starts here, we sort of lower down, and then we bend forward. He's the exact opposite. Everything's from the chest. So the chest goes down, because that's the center of gravity, and everything else just has to follow around after it. Which is why at points he's almost in an arachnid kind of position. Yeah, his chest is no human's chest is supposed to be that close to the ground in a natural way. We don't ever need to move that close to the ground. But because he's following the biology of the people that raised him, he's following that movement. His center of gravity is across the shoulders. So he's very, very low to the ground. When he moves chest first and not hip first. So notice there actually, if we just look at this again. When he stands upright, his chest goes upwards, his shoulders go upwards, and his torso just kind of hangs behind, almost like without purpose. We wouldn't do that. If we were crouched down, and then we wanted to kind of look upwards or look around us, we'd sit on our bum. Yeah, we'd just sit on the floor, wouldn't you? You'd just sit upright and look around. Your center of gravity would lead, would plant itself, and there you are. His doesn't do that, it leads from the chest. His mechanics are completely different. And we can see it in the swings as well. So when he swings, he swings from the arms. Everything's kind of across this line is where we flow from, across that T line. Yeah, even his shoulders, when he drops, notice this is again brilliant actually. Just going to go back a few frames if I can. When he falls shoulder first. That's not how people fall. We fall feet first, and we hope that our ankles are strong enough to take the impact. We do not fall shoulder first to the ground. Yeah, chest first. So again, those mechanics are broken. Well, not broken, but they're adapted for a different reason. So again, just one more example from Tarzan here. Sorry, the shocking quality of that. But when he's pulling a vine to test that it's like strong enough to pull him up. If we were pulling on something like that, we'd hold on and we'd lean back. Yeah, we'd lean from the top, from the hips. We'd kind of go, all right, I'll just give that a little pull. That's fine. He doesn't. His hips are almost ignored. His back is arched, and he's pulling from the shoulders. Everything again. He's just across the shoulders in that movement. So yeah, that's Tarzan. Great, another example of really, really high quality body mechanics, and it worked. I mean, say what you like about the acting within this. The script is. Everyone's got an opinion on the scripts and stuff, but the actual performance of the characters is really, really strong. It's because they've actually thought about it. They haven't just decided that Tarzan's a giant, muscly guy in a loincloth. He behaves like an ape. Yeah, he moves like a gorilla. So it's really, really important. So that's Tarzan. Now I'll show you some 3D stuff. So this one's from Miles Yo. This is one that I thought you might have seen kicking about. You seen this? Have you seen this? No? Just a little animation test that he did, where it's a great example of mechanics. Okay, we'll just put this on loop. So, you remember what I said about anger doesn't have to be big? Yeah? Doesn't have to be big movements. Yeah? Those small movements are very aggressive. They imply a fight is about to happen. So that's the first thing of the mechanics of that performance. Yeah? It's not big. He's not like swinging his swords around. He's very subtle, very small movements. The eye lock as well. So notice, watch Leonardo's face. He's looking in one place. So our head is locked. That's a sign of aggression. Yeah, eye contact, focus on a subject is far more aggressive than a chest beating, arm swinging kind of roar of power. Okay, really, really good. The mechanics and the performance of that really sharp. The other thing the reason I've showed you this, and I'm not saying he's cheated. I'm saying he's a very good animator. What Miles has done with this has locked the camera to the rigid part of this character's body. So, and you don't really see it at the beginning. At the beginning, it just feels like the camera's panning with him. Yeah? It's like, look, we're just panning with you, following you while you make aggressive eyes at someone. But as soon as we start to move, I don't know why my little controllers aren't working here. I wonder if I have to go into full screen. Hang on, let's go to full screen. Yeah, they are. Here we go. So when we go into the flip, the camera actually notice the ground move there. See, the camera's actually following up. The camera is following his shell. It's tracking to his shell, and that is the genius of this in terms of mechanics, because that shell can't move. It's a completely rigid structure. So all of this character can do is move their outer limbs. They've got their rotation and their flexion, but they haven't got the thing that we have, which is the core of the top half being rigid and the bottom half being completely flexible. And that's what allows us to kind of contort into different shapes, and to lean back and to punch forward, the side-to-side movements. We can do all those things. This character can't do any of that. So instead, we've got this rigid shape in the middle. And he uses that. He maximizes it by saying, look, it's just a sphere, basically. So why not just have everything move around the sphere? Yeah, why not just have him almost locked into position and have his flexible elements rotate around the rigid elements? Which is probably, I don't know, I mean, we can't guess at what the design of a fictional character is, I suppose, but actually it's pretty accurate. It's pretty believable as a design. Yeah, it's still got a believability to it. So yeah, it's great work, absolutely brilliant body mechanics work. What I quite appreciate about this, I know these characters quite well. This is my childhood, yeah, the kind of late 80s, early 90s cartoons. These characters, they've gone through lots of different design iterations, They've gone multiple, and the most recent stuff that's come through Nickelodeon Studios in the last 10 years, the characters are really flexible. Like the shell is almost not a thing. Like they're really bendy in the middle. And this casts all that aside and goes, no, I'm going to actually look at the anatomy here, go back to the anatomy of these characters and almost keep it honest, keep it very, very realistic. And yeah, it's quite good. It's not a bad piece of design. Right, the last body mechanics example before we do some practical work is I want to show you the one that made me think I need to think more about body mechanics because I'm not doing this at the right level. And I'm hoping that the music is going to be loud enough. How many of you have seen this by Carlos Baena? You'd know it. If you've seen it, you'd know it. Okay. Bear with me a second. I'll just go full screen with this. I hope the sound's working. Okay, so that is. Oh yeah, and then okay, we'll show you this one as well.
Well, I don't think I can do it. He is standing, I can. Plan. Yes.
Okay, let's go back to this one. Sort of leave that in there. Yeah, for me, this was a bit of a game changer. So this was made in 2009 during the development of Toy Story 3, and I'm hoping you've all seen it. If you haven't, just go and watch it. I mean, I'm not a big, like I'm a kind of fan. I've got a lot of appreciation for what Pixar have done in terms of like of how they've applied 3D animation. But there's something about this film. The perfect film doesn't exist. But if it did exist, it might be Toy Story 3. In terms of its narrative structure, performance, character arcs, it's too good to be a Toy Story movie. Like, it's very, very carefully done. So it's one to look at. But obviously with that, the narrative required, the story required a Spanish buzz. Yeah, that's part of the narrative. It's a key component. So in order to do that, they have to first obviously take the thing that they know, which is the anatomy of the character they have. They take the next thing that they know, which is what the script requires, and from the two of them, they have to understand what is the implication for mechanics. How do these two things affect the mechanics? So Carlos Baena was the animator, one of the animators that kind of took that on board and went, all right, I will figure out Spanish buzz. I'll figure out those movements and those mechanics and try to understand how they work. And that this is the output of that. And there's so much in here that is not just an understanding of acting, but it was also a very good understanding. All right. It's a very good understanding of the mechanics of the character. So Buzz is interesting because he's got extreme rotation in multiple places. So he's not a human. He has extreme rotation in his wrists that humans don't have to the same level. So his wrists are far more flexible than ours. But at the same time, he has only flexion in his feet. So his feet don't really rotate that way at all. They kind of only just go up and down. He's also not, we've got a rigid and a flexible, yeah? Rigid on the rib cage, flexible on the midriff, like, across the stomach. He doesn't have that. He has two rigids, yeah, because he's made of plastic, okay? He also has no muscle. Even his flexible bits aren't flexible. They're just rotating or articulated rigids. So he's like a puppet, effectively. He has no muscle. Think about that rhino and how the shapes are like bent and smooth and dragged and like to create like the right kind of feel. You can't do any of that with him. So what Carlos did with this is instead focus on the performance. So, okay, how can I use the performance to exaggerate the mechanics? Think on the idea of aggression. There's aggression in this. Obviously, it's like a, lustful dancing aggression as opposed to a fighting aggression. But the aggression's still there, and that's why it's so heavy on poses. He literally moves pose to pose. Again, the anger, smooth, like subtle movements, not big movements. And then the final thing, this is the work of genius here, is remembering the design of your character. What does your character have within them that allows you to exaggerate their mechanics? And it's this. This is the bit that kind of sold it, I think, to the studio. That. And then down to the knee drop. Yeah, very, very cleverly designed. And it worked. And actually, if you look at, if you go back and watch the film and watch the Spanish Buzz scenes, the methodologies applied in this body mechanics test, everything from the poses. See if I can get every pose. There's the next one. There's the next one. Not yet. There it is. Yeah, so all of those poses, they translate into the character if you watch the film. Everything he does, every time the Spanish Buzz speaks, he moves into a pose to do it. And then he moves out of the pose into the next thing. Yeah? He moves his body in a completely different way to normal Buzz. He's a different character with different mechanics because the narrative needs it. I remember I saw this, it would have been like 2000, I think the film had just come out actually, and someone directed me to Carlos's website and said, this is the guy that did Spanish Buzz. I was like, oh, okay, I'll check it out. And he just had just this video, not his whole reel on there. I was like, okay, I'm not thinking about mechanics, especially as a 2D animator, because at that time I was only working in 2D. I was like, I'm not thinking about mechanics nearly enough. I'm thinking too much about like clean lines, like clean drawing, crisp design. I wasn't thinking about movement and about performance. So, what we're going to do today, we're going to start the process of thinking about performance. Go away. Here we go, here's our task. So tasks. We're going to focus on 3 things through 3 processes. So on the right hand side are our narrative guides. So 3 words as a narrative guide. Heavy, nimble, and catch. Descriptions of physicality. Something is heavy, something is nimble, and something is caught, or someone catches something. The next thing the way we're going to apply that is through this process. Have any of you ever used this principle before? Anticipate, take, react. It's very common. It exists all through character animation. Most people don't even realize they're seeing it. But the idea of anticipate, take, react is that you have character exists in their normal state. That's just who they are. Something is about to happen to them, and the take happens, the change in the environment, so something happens to them, and so that's their take. And then the react is based on how they're made and who they are, they physically react to it in some way. It's really common. Character exists, something happens, they react to it. Anticipate, take, react. So these are now going to be 3 separate poses across 3 separate themes, 3 separate narratives. So we've got to effectively, or you, I'm doing it too, so I'll say we're going to create 9 poses. Okay, 3 for each of these. So for the heavy, we're going to be like, okay, we're going to put them in a pose where they're anticipating something heavy. Then we're going to have them, the take, so the change, so they're going to react to that heavy object. And then the reaction is like what their actual body does as a reaction to that heavy object. So 3 poses. Then we'll do it with nimble. Yeah? Then in their natural rested state, then a change happening, and then reacting in a nimble manner. And then finally, a catch. They're in their rested state, something flies at them, and they react to it based on their design. Okay, so they're going to move towards a catch pose. So what we're going to do with these is I'm going to show you how to do this in Maya. How many of you used Maya before? I'm hoping no one, just a couple. Good. All right, yeah, so a few people. We're going to do this in Maya. I've got those assets already set for us to work with. But we're not going to work with Maya is the tool that we're going to use to speed up the process. We're using Maya purely because it's faster. This is not a 3D animation task, this is a 2D animation task. And what we're going to do with those we're going to find those 9 poses, we're going to screenshot them all once we've kind of got the pose into position. And then we're going to take those screenshots into Photoshop and we're going to analyze the mechanics, analyse where they need to be exaggerated, amplified, or manipulated in some way to make the character more effective. Okay? So you will need to be logged in. Open Moodle. I'm going to navigate now to Moodle where you can get the files that you want, or that you need, should I say. So on Moodle, you should have this file, which is BA Animation LCC Full-Time Year 2. And then when you scroll down, let's turn my editing off. When you scroll down, you've got an actual folder called Body Mechanics Sessions. So that's really going to annoy me. Let me just rescale this screen. That's better. So yeah, you've got this area called Body Mechanics Sessions. I've given you 2 rigs to use. My preference is that you use the rig called Stuart. Okay, this is a rig that's come from, funnily enough, has come from Animation Mentor, which is the company that Carlos Bain started. So it's one of his team's rigs. So it's BA Animation, it's the Year 2 dashboard, not the main course dashboard. It's on your list when you log in. So I would prefer that you use the Stuart rig. Okay, yeah, you should. Did you unzip it? Yeah. Doesn't matter. If you're only doing performance with it, it doesn't matter with the textures of this image. It's not an issue. What matters more is that you can see all these components, which looks like a camera. Yeah, it might be that you want to drag it into onto your desktop, so just put it somewhere safe. Don't try and operate it from a remote device. Just don't, whatever you do, don't put it on a USB stick. Okay, never work from Maya on a USB stick. So we're gonna open that. The other one I've given you is THEP. So I'll just show you the difference between these two, actually. The one we're going to use is Stuart. And Stuart, when he loads, looks like that if you've got all the textures in place. So the folders should all be together. Don't worry if the textures haven't loaded, we don't need them. So that's Stuart, and then the other one I've given you is THEP. The reason I thought I'd provide you with THEP is because he's a more cartoony rig. So if you've got, if you're thinking of doing this work beyond this session, and you want to use something that's a little bit more simplified, like super simplistic, THEP's a good one. It's a very, very cartoony character to work with. So I know that some of you kind of are okay with Maya, it sounds, and some of you are probably not. We're going to go through this very slowly. I'm going to walk you through how to use this space. So this is not a Maya lesson. This is just how to use the tools you need just to get this thing to work. Yes. Well, you need to go down and get it unlocked. How you lock? Go to the information center and ask, or you can go to the technicians. They can unlock you. So my preference is that you use Stuart, just because he's closer to a standard human. Okay, but THEP is there for your access if you want to. So I'm just going to open up Stuart again. Okay, folks, has everyone got one login in there? And everyone else has got Stuart's kind of open. Okay. Don't touch it. We're going to move through this kind of together. Okay, so what we're going to do, a couple of changes we're going to make. First off, Stuart is, by default, he's set to being FK. Do you all know what I mean by the difference between FK and IK? No, one person's nodding, a lot of people shaking. Okay, all right. This is going to be very boring for everyone who's going to watch the stream of this. But for you, those of you in the room, this is how it works. Stop touching the rig. Because then you'll be like, it doesn't work, Dan. Yeah, I know, you touched it. Okay, so there are 2 types of articulation in 3D. In movement in general, actually, in all animation, particularly in 3D. Forward kinematic, which is abbreviated as FK, and inverse kinematic. Forward kinematic works like this. You go from the core to the extremity. So if I want to animate my left arm and it's set to forward kinematic and I want to take my arm from here to here, I would have to do it from the core to the extremity. So I'd start by rotating the shoulder forward, then I'd go to the elbow joint and rotate it up, then I'd go to the wrist joint and rotate that up. And that's how I'd get the body to that position. Okay, that's a forward kinematic movement. So starting at the core, move to the extremity, one, then the other. Inverse kinematic is when we grab the extremity and move the limb into the position we want. So instead of grabbing the shoulder, we grab the wrist and we just lift the wrist to where we want it, and then we rotate it into the position. If we want to lift the leg up, we lift from the foot, and the knee and the hip will naturally follow. So inverse kinematic is the better way to do quite subtle movements and quite characterized or performance-based movements. Forward kinematic is when you just need to get stuff moving quickly and fast to a position, jumped to a position. Okay. So as a default, this rig is set to be a forward kinematic rig. So we're going to go through a couple of changes to change it all to an inverse kinematic rig. It's not hard, it's just knowing where to go on the interface. So I'm going to walk you through it nice and easy. So if everyone could just pause what you're doing. Before we get started, on your mouse, if you don't know this, hold down the Alt key on your keyboard. Left click rotates, right click zooms, and the middle button tracks. So that's how you navigate the space for starters. So what we're going to do is there's a couple of key points on this rig that we need to navigate to in order to set it to inward kinematic. So we've got the polygons, so we've got the actual shape, so we've got that rig, and can you see all these little things, these little markers, the red and blue and yellow markers? They are our curves. They're effectively our handles that we're going to grab to move this character. That's how we're going to manipulate him, is using those handles. So the way that we're going to set the handles to work for us, we're going to look for the two that are at the ends of his hands. All the best rigs are color coordinated, by the way. If any of you do kind of start to play with 3D a bit more, go for work with rigs that are color coordinated. There's a really good one called Malcolm. It's like the best rig ever. It's completely color coordinated. It's got its own control panel. It's lovely. But we're going to go to click on this component just here. You can see this little node on the end. That is the rig. That's the curve controller. Now what happened is when I clicked that on the right hand side, I just got this whole big jumbled mess of stuff appeared. Quite a confusing block of stuff. And on that list it says Snap IK FK. When I click this, you'll get a little pop-up, and I'm going to set it to IK. Like that, and you'll see his wrist just changed colour. I'm going to go over to this one, to the other side, just here. You'll see it popped up again. I'm going to select this and go to IK. And then I'm going to just rotate the camera down here a little bit, because I'm going down to his feet, the feet controllers. I think it's the floor plates. It is. So the two plates on the floor, there's a blue one and a red one, and they have the same option. To IK, and this one to IK. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. The next thing I'm going to do is work out which tools I'm going to use. W, E, R. W, E, and R are your three main tool sets. W is translate, so physically move something in a space. E is rotate something in a space. R is scale something in a space. Never use R when you're animating. When you're doing that basic body mechanics stuff like we're doing, you don't ever scale anything, because you'll just mess the rig up. All right, don't do that. Not that we're animating today. I promise you, we're not going to animate. We're going to pose. That's the plan for this session. So what we've done, we've turned on those IKs. Now what I can do is I can grab these handles. So on the wrists, they are located just here. Go to W. And then on the feet, they are located at the back of the heel. And you can see what I can then do is just grab these, and the character very nicely moves as I want it to. Now there's a couple of ways you can control it. When you're moving stuff, you can use the axis controllers. So they'll just move it in one direction. But notice how when I move the ankle that the knee and the hip follow. Yeah, so it's set to inverse kinematics. He's got natural stretch as well. It's a lovely rig, this one. So, and then, yeah, I've got the forward one. And then when I grab the central point, which is the orange marker, and just click, now I've got free movement. So I can move it in kind of any direction. So it's a combination of all three to start to manipulate your character. Same up here for the wrist. So the wrist can be grabbed here. Got free movement. Move it back. Or you've got that axis movement. Notice how it's there. The elbow's got its own controller as well. So if I bring this up, see that little node at the back? That's the elbow. So when I move that, the elbow will rotate up or down. Yeah, shoulder blade, left or right. So those are our limb movements. And then the next couple I'm going to show you, just going to move out slightly, are the gimbal, which is, if I zoom in, the gimbal is this blue one. See this blue kind of diamond shape? It's this one just here. It's really important because when you click the gimbal, sorry, I just deselect it. When you click that, it highlights every node, every curve, every controller gets highlighted. And the reason it does that is because this one actually affects all of them. So if I grab this and move it down, you see how it moves the whole body. Yeah, everything moves off of that gimbal because that's our center of gravity. That's our positioning point where we start to think about a pose because humans move from the hips. We can rotate that, so if we use E, I can rotate it. With the rotator tools, you've got your main ones. So you've got, there's X, there's Y, there's Z. And then you've got an outer sphere, which is that blue one, and that one moves it depending on where your camera is positioned. So if I move it here and then do it, see it moves a different way. If I move around here and do it, it moves a different way. Okay, so those are our main controllers. We've got some for the head as well. So the head's got its own. It's got a top of the neck controller, which is around the head, just there. So if I zoom in. So it's this one around the head, so just click that. I can rotate the head at the top. And then there's another one at the neck, just there. And that one rotates the head and the neck together. So it's a bigger neck movement. And then you've got shoulder controllers as well to lift and lower the shoulders. So these yellow ones kind of control the torso, and the red and the blue control the body. Now, what we're going to do is going back to this. Where are we? We got to do 9 poses. So we need to think about, okay, what does the character look like in their rested state if they're really heavy? What does the character got to look like when they're about to lift something heavy or move something heavy? When it's about to happen, and then what do they look like when it's actually happening? So 3 poses. Just for that one description, just for heavy. So 3 poses, all 3 of these, just to cover 1. And then we do all 3 more, just to cover 2. So what I would like you to do, and there's 2 ways you can work. Oh, no, don't open that, I'll crash the machine. There's 2 ways you can do this, depending on how comfortable you are in Maya. If you are not comfortable at all in Maya, I would like you to just pose the character and then take a screenshot. And then pose the character again and take a screenshot. Okay? If you are confident in Maya, I'm happy for you to do it on different frames. So you can do posed frames. So you could do, one at frame 1, which is here, one at frame 10, which is there, one at frame 20. So you could, at different points in time, do the different poses. To do that, you just got to make sure that your auto animate key, which is that one there, auto animate is active, so it's down the bottom right hand corner. Your choice. I'm not asking, this is not an animation session. We are just very quickly designing poses based on mechanics. So start with heavy. Heavy's an obvious one. Do you remember what we said about heavy characters? Legs apart. Knees can't quite hold the weight of the body, potentially. Arms low. If the weight is in the head will be low as well. Yeah? Lots of curvature, not a straight spine, a curved spine. So I want you to work slowly through this and position this character. If anyone's got any questions, just shout. Just shout at me. I'm going to do it on the screen as well. I'm going to do heavy and work through all 3 of those poses. Just start, when you find the pose, take a screenshot. Remember, don't grab the object, grab the curves. Okay? Don't grab the object, grab the curves. Just work through it very slowly. Think about that performance, think about mechanics. Okay? Okay, don't get to it. So it's the Alt key to move the camera, and to move around. So have you set things?
Okay, so I have to
That one. Done? So you've grabbed this one, you've grabbed the hips, so the hips have gone green, not the dimples, so the hips. So yeah, if you move those back, now if you move that one, you'll see the shoulders. There you go, yes, you've got much clean. So use I know it's a very alien process, maybe for some of you, but use the camera, move the camera around gently to kind of get that character into position. Have you set all yours to? Yeah, to IK. So set everything to inverse kinematics. So on screen now, I'm going to work through the same process, the 3 stages of heavy. You do not have to copy me. I'm going to do mine across different frames, just so you can see them, so you can see the difference. Right, I don't know why I'm looking up there. I should be looking down here. Okay. I'm just going to move my character back a little bit. If you can't select something, select away, like click into the grey and then try and select it again. Okay, just a little bit of guidance for you. Just pause for a second, everybody, because I can hear them. I can hear lots of frantic clicking, which is good. That means people are having a crack at this. Once you've got that sort of first position, and you want to get that screenshot of it, you don't want all the curves and stuff in the way. So what I recommend you do. Sorry, hang on. I'm not happy with that. Yeah, it's a bit better. Okay, yeah, once you kind of got the curves where you want them, and you're kind of like, yeah, that kind of looks all right. What you then need to do is go up to your main, so this is your main perspective view at the moment. Go to show just here, so inside this box, you go show and click none, and then go show again and select polygons. And that will bring up just the pose on its own without all the curves, like all the handles and stuff. So you can just get a clearer view of like, what does this shape actually look like? What does the silhouette look like? You can still move around it if you want to and sort of view it, but it just gives you an idea of like, yeah, what is that pose? Like, how does that kind of actually work? I can see some stuff there that needs fixing. I've got to get that neck in line. That neck's off. Yeah, and then once you're happy with that, just go back to show and just select all at the top, and it'll just bring back all your controllers. This one. Here we go. That's a bit better. Remember, Control Z is your friend. So yeah, once you're happy, just get a capture of it. So I'm going to move to frame. I'm moving to frame 10 now, and I'm going to start the next movement. Okay. Okay. It's probably this accidentally slip this lower portion out, so you remove the rig. Just step backwards. Just take 3 steps backwards. Check it again. So you just go Control Z backwards 3 or 4 times. Right. Now stop. Okay. Yeah. Go on. If stuff happens like that. When you spot it, step backwards. Otherwise, you have to reattach your rig. We don't want to do that. Okay, so yeah, once you've got that first one, move into that print screen, capture it. How are we doing for time? It's 11:30 already. What's happening? What is happening? So I've got my first one there that I'm kind of happy with. None. Polygons. If you don't know how to keyframe it, don't do
I
it.
just don't remember how to activate it.
it's just down here in the bottom right is the auto keyframe for any movements. But just if you're not confident with keyframing in this, just don't do it because we're not. This is not an animation exercise. This is a posing exercise. We don't want to create additional problems for ourselves. The curves. And we're grabbing the curves.
Oh my goodness, that's smoking.
Sorry? So W is translate to what you set and you write these points here are just the controllers. Okay. So yeah, just make sure you just get into the habit of like, taking those screenshots. But think about it. Think about the mechanics. Like if this is an object that's heavy, why are they standing this way? How are they able to manipulate themselves this way? If you can't do this with a physical object, because this is effectively a physical object. If you can't do this with a physical object, it's a very big task to ask you to be able to do it with a drawing. Yeah, where you don't have any reference material. So kind of heading towards my second pose now, and I'm just going to add some of the kind of more personality details to it. I'll bring those shoulders down a little bit. That's about right. And once you've done that, just move on to that next pose. Right, folks, we are approaching 12 o'clock. If you need to go for like a 10-minute break, you're welcome to do so now. Save your work. And then when we come back, we can look at how we can actually utilise this. Like, what is the actual point of using Maya for this kind of stuff? We can take a look. Okay, so yeah, you've got till 10 past 12 just to kind of go and get a drink or do whatever you need to do. And then we shall come back.
Oh my.
Yes.
He's kind of like. Oh my god, what's he doing writing when you
No, Jay and I have got ideas.
Yeah.
We've got some stuff in the tank. So those stuff. We were like, we're all trying to get and there's going to be like time progresses in the background or whatever, but you know, they weren't live for a lot of it, so they didn't I think if you ask like 10 people, all 10 of them will say it's a pretty cool. Yeah, we've run the numbers. If you messed up, you got like 5 o'clock and we cried.
2 weeks ago, and see that she runs. You're gonna tell me. Oh my god. Oh. We went to something, and one of the parents came out and told everybody off to tune their
Yeah.
He told us to get up.
Yeah.
Okay, I was missing half. First, I find out this weird thing on the floor with only like 3 things. I thought I was doing that. I just Jared. He pointed right at him. So Jared.
Right.
And then looked, I didn't know that shit. And then tells us to stand up. Yeah, my legs are in it.
Yeah.
My little legs.
Yeah, you guys are good. We can see him from behind.
Exactly. So why did you tell us to get up? Because there are people behind us. Well, we can see them. I How long has it? But the same has the same energy as you, like the chaotic energy. Like I don't know stuff about imagining it, like things that's it.
Right, folks, we get started again. It's nearly 15:15. We are running out of time. Right, if everyone can just kind of stop what they're doing for a moment. Where are we? That one. I just want to walk you through what the next stage of this process is. So have a seat, and then we shall have a chat about what do we actually do with this information. That one in. That one in. So what I'm doing now is I've taken my screenshots, and I am now going into Photoshop, and I'm just kind of lining them up, getting them side by side with one another. That one needs to be a little bit smaller. Room for one more. Which one is it? It's that one. Okay, right, so everyone stop what you're doing. So the whole point of this exercise, the whole purpose of what we're looking at today is not Maya. That's just the fastest way to think about physicality. Okay, it is the less embarrassing way as well. The alternative, and this is one commonly utilised, I'll find some footage of it hopefully before the end of the session, the most commonly utilised method to understand the mechanics of your character is to get up out of your chair and to act the sequence that you're trying to animate. Okay, that is the most commonly used method by animators since the 1920s onwards. Get up out of your chair, act it out of yourself. Act it out of yourself, understand how you want your character to perform, and then use that information to interpret it. So, do you guys know who Ward Kimball is? Ward Kimball is one of the original 9 old men who worked for Disney, and his preferred method was to keep mirrors on his animation desk. So he'd always have mirrors around him and would practice positions and facial expressions and movements in front of these mirrors to better understand how to then translate that information into his characters. Okay, that's one method. This is the same thing, except this is effectively faster. If you can navigate Maya, once you build a bit of familiarity with Maya, it's a very quick way to understand what your characters are able to do. This stage is only the first part. Okay? The second stage of this is then to go into this information and start making decisions about what can you actually do to make this better. That's why we've got it. Well, the next stage is to go into Photoshop, because in Photoshop, the next stage is to do draw-overs, to sketch over the top of these positions to work out, well, if this is quite a realistic standing position or a catch position or a lifting position, well, realism is an animation. They're very different techniques, very different processes. I need to exaggerate. Yeah, I need to amplify meaning and maximize movement and really kind of over dramatize certain actions, because that's what animation requires in order for it to be effective. So what I'd like you to do is, once you've kind of got 3 at a time, so as you get 3 of your poses done, get the screenshots done and do what I've done here. So I put them into Photoshop side by side. So there's 3 that I've done with that, and there's the 3 that I've done with Stuart. Now I chose heavy and catch. Okay, I skipped nimble just because I had a really clear idea of what I wanted to do with catch, and so I'm just going to go and get that kind of underway as quick as I can. But with heavy, what I focused on was, instead of the character being heavy, I chose object. I chose it to be an external force and started to think about, well, how big is this guy and what is he capable of actually doing? And the first shot is that anticipate. It's not, action hasn't actually started yet. Yeah, it's what do we do before we act, before we move. So the idea of the first pose was to have him kind of get into a stance that's ready and start to think about how I move. Already from this first one, already from this image, I can tell you right now what I would like to change when I come to actually do my 2D animation, when I start to draw this, is that this pose, the starting stance of the legs is too wide. The legs need to come in a little bit. And the other thing I'm thinking is, actually, though the shoulders aren't perfectly symmetrical, they are fairly level, and I think actually it needs to be a bit more slack. It needs to be like his right shoulder needs to be up a little bit. You've just got a slight angle there that will complement the angle of the hips. So I'm thinking about those kind of lines. But just doing this exercise and spending 5 minutes in Maya just going, yeah, if I just put the character kind of here, that's the first step to understanding what your drawn characters will start to look like. Yes, you can start to sketch those positions in over the top now in Photoshop. So I've just dumped all the files in side by side. So there's my kind of 3 movements. The other things I want to do, this is weak. This pull, so the third one where he's kind of lifting the heavy object, he's kind of lifting it up, is actually really weak. And all the tension seems to be in the neck, and that wouldn't work for the type of drawing that I'm perhaps going to do. So I think what I'd probably do is make the neck shorter, but make the arms longer, to get exaggeration and stretch on the arms, to really get a pull, make the character feel a bit more elastic. So that's why I'd make that change, definitely. And then the other thing I'd do, this one here, this is a stylistic change, but I'm going on the assumption, let's just draw one in quickly. I'm actually working on the assumption that he's lifting up a sphere. Yeah, something kind of around this size. Yeah, that's kind of placed in front of him there. I think what I would probably have actually is, instead of him just sort of squatting down like this, like a weird sort of like amusement arcade crane toy thing, it doesn't seem very natural to me. So I think what I'd actually do is have him reach down and put his hand on it, so hand on top, then reach down, round and lift it, and do it that way. And I think just thinking about this hand position here, let's make that a little bit smaller. There we go. So just thinking about this hand position, here. So yeah, this hand, so the hand that was kind of up on his hip becomes the one that he then leans forward, puts it onto the ball, and almost uses the ball or the weight or whatever it is to like balance himself as he squats down and then lifts it up. It's all just planning for animation. But the value of this process is I'm actually now thinking about it. And it's very hard to think about these kind of movements if all you've got in front of you is a blank canvas in Toon Boom or a blank canvas in TV Paint and a bunch of really nice posed character drawings next to you of your characters looking all nice and clean. Very difficult to think about these complex movements and how do we want something to actually behave. So that's the plan now, is to go into Photoshop, to line these up side by side, and to start making notes on where you would change things for a drawn animation. So going out of 3D and back towards 2D. So I want you to get 3 poses into Photoshop, get them lined up like that, then go back to Maya, get your next 3 done. If you'd like to have a go with Thep, have a go with Thep. So this other character, this guy is really nice because he's very cartoony. You know, he's really kind of soft and cartoony, and there's actually something quite nice about that it's not realistic. You know, it's not got any kind of even close to an element of hyperrealism. But again, with this one, I was thinking, okay, what do I actually want him to do? Well, I want him to move on the spot. I don't want him to stay static, so I've actually got him taking 2 steps back, and then his kind of hands coming forward. And this time, because it's a catch, just go into a bit more detail on these, a bit pixelated, just because I did screen grabs. But because the theme was catch, I had to think about what the focus of the animation is. The focus of the animation isn't his whole body, it's the catch. That's the action that I'm trying to think about, how am I going to animate this in 2D. So the focus should be the hands. Yeah, the hands are the guide for that movement. So why not actually start the relaxed pose being him looking at his hands? That sends a very clear signal to the audience of, look at his hands. Yeah, because he's about to do something with them. So that was the first pose. Second pose is that take. Yeah, oh look, he's seen something. Something's coming in into his kind of vicinity. So obviously move the eyes, bring the hands away, bring them into a preparation position. And then I've got to step back but hands forward. So his hands effectively stay in the same space, like here. So they go from here up towards his body, and then he moves back. So he moves his body out of the way and brings his hands into focus. And you can see I used some of the preset hand shapes in Maya for this rig, just to get a nice kind of structure on kind of where his hands would be, ready to catch this object. Okay, and he's starting to fall into line with himself. So his limbs are overlapping one another, where his feet are. So I'm thinking about it. You know, if I'm going to animate this, how do I want it to look? How do I want it to behave? Okay, what am I going to do? So have a crack at this now. Just see if you can get a couple of poses into Photoshop side by side. And then once you see them, when you see them as a flat object, you'll think about them differently. Yeah, you should be able to look at them and go, no, this is off, this isn't right, or that isn't right. You know, how can I change it? How can I make it work slightly differently? So I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to, on a new layer over the top, I'm just going to make some very kind of rough notes to myself. Yeah, I'm just making notes saying, look, this is roughly what I'm thinking. And I'll do it in like bright green as well. Keep it really kind of visible.
I can find the controls on the pen model.
Sorry? Oh, on the Thep model, sorry, yeah, I can go back to those and show you. In Maya, let's just go all. So on Thep, they are these little plus symbols, I do believe. So there's one there, but instead of it being a switch, it's a number. So I've just, on the feet, there's these little plus models. So you click on the plus model, plus curve there, and then under the controllers at the top, you just turn it from 0 to 1, where it says IK, FK switch. I think they're the only ones. The hands might have them, I can't remember. The hands have got poses, which is really nice. So you just change the numbers from like 0 to 3. So I can change that. I think it goes higher than that actually. So if I got, I don't know, spread 5. Yeah, some slight. One of the things that's quite nice about THEP compared to the other model is that with THEP you can actually put more focus on facial expression and thinking about like where do you want your audience to look, and because they're giant eyes, it's quite nice to just go, well, he's, you know, the character's head's this way, but he's looking that way. And you can start to think about those kind of like little details, but because it's so big, you can just go, oh yeah, it's just like this or just like that. So even if your character, the actual 2D animation you're doing isn't designed anything like this, it just helps you think about it. Yeah, the process here should really be around thinking. So what did I say here? So this one, let's get an actual useful brush.
What? Oh my god. What is this wrong? What is this bug? It's like chest, but I can't move whatever that is.
Hang on a second, I'll come over and take a look. So yeah, I don't have my graphic tablet, so I'm just making notes for the moment. But yeah, it's going to be a draw over. We're going to be putting that leg down here a bit lower, and then yeah, I'm place that hand on top, sort the wrists and the hand position out because this is off, and then sort the neck out. So less neck, more arms. I might make note of that as well actually. So yeah, just more arms. How are we doing? Half hour left in it. Okay. So I'm just going to bring up some examples for you actually here. That's not helpful. What's happening? Okay, we'll be done. Okay, separate it out. Bye. What were you trying to do? Okay, then grab your shoulders. in that case, you don't need to bring the shoulders down, you just bring it forwards.
That's what I was trying to say.
Okay. So, special over shoulders down. So you also need to further to this neck, yes, this neck. You see we over pull the neck high at some point. You see the distance between these. No. It's not focusing.
Yeah, so you probably did it. There's now my stone.
Yeah, they should be able to
Yeah,
because
they
you
have to
step
be
over so far. That much actually. When you do something wrong, minor. Best technique, very best thing to do is step back. Yeah, step forward is going to
I know she always do a massive video picture. Because they must have been so Oh, Dylan. You sure I'm scared to speak up and
easiest way to do it is just use the reference and just use the actual names that will reference file. Which might be, depends how different it is from your first post. It might be good to do that.
like,
Because that's going to take a while to figure out exactly where how far off the position.
it's nuts.
That line.
Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? That was seriously. Yeah. See that one? You
I
got
think that's
lip-sync.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah, because that's realigning this one. Well, that's exactly realigning. Yeah, you can't find strong. Okay, and guys, just as advice working with the Maya rigs, try and think quite carefully about the order that things move. So the bones themselves don't all exist in a silo; they do relate to one another. So on the Stuart rig, those central yellow hand curves, those controllers, control the entirety of the spine, and most of the movement actually should be within those. The pink or the red ones, sorry, they are pink, that sit on the inside, they're almost like the discs, like the vertebrae of the spine, so they're more subtle movements, and you shouldn't be rotating from them, because that's how you'll end up with a very strange kind of looking movement. This is great, yes, you're making those notes, where do I move, where do I shift into position? Well, I think your right shoulders need to go down, because you'll get a better shape as well, I think, if you push the shoulders slightly. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk to you about, because we are actually supposed to finish at 1 today. Well, it's not that on your timetable, but till 10 till 1. Going all the way back, do you remember? I say, do you remember? Silly thing to say. This phrase, complex and simple lines. Yeah, and I said, we'll talk about that later. I want to show you some examples of why this phrase is like vital. And I do mean absolutely vital in body mechanics, so the actual performance, but also the design for performance. Because that's what you're doing. You're not animating, you're designing. You're thinking about, when I animate, what poses am I going into? You know, how do I make sure that a movement conveys accurately and reads the right way and has the right meaning to it, and it's in line with my story and my character. complex and simple lines are the way to do that. So the rule for complex and simple is that when you look at the shape or the structure of a character, the character should have complex lines across one side of their form and simple lines across the other side of their form. So if you look at some of these characters, they do have that. They have complex lines on one side and simple lines on the other. So this guy in the top right-hand corner, his simple line is here, it's this nice bowed shape of his belly into his legs. His complex line are these bumps and ridges along his back. Okay, so complex, simple. This guy down here, simple line is his back. Complex line is his arms crossed to his folds down to his feet. So it's that process of looking at a character's pose and thinking, okay, if this pose works, where's the complex, where is the simple? Some more animation mentor stuff there. So these poses, great examples of kind of complex and simple happening together. So the simple line here is this nice sweeping line from this toe to the tip of the head, nice bowed line, and the complex is the zigzag up the side. All right, the simple line here is this one, so this nice shape here, and the complex line is the one on the inside, the right-hand side. So it's really thinking, with the characters posing, is there a complex side and a simple side? Because that will help it read nice and clearly to the audience. Some artists do this and they don't even know they're doing it. That's a great example. Some concept work for Tangled. The simple line is the right-hand side. We should go to Living Lines Library, actually. We'll have a look in there in a second. Simple line down the right-hand side, complex line down the left-hand side. That's the earmark of a good piece of posing. Okay, so you look at some of these characters. We should have complex, we should have simple. So simple is is effectively just a straight line down one side. Complex, you've actually got, it digs in and it comes out into an elbow. Simple line, nice easy one around the edge there. Complex line is you've got the arm sticking out on this side. Simple line here is the smoothness. Smoothness on the back. It's a fairly straight line. And the complex is you just got loads of information on the inside. And it's a really good rule to stick to with your poses. So when you're designing stuff. So let's go to Pat. I'll show you some different artists that interpret this differently. Pat Comper has probably got one of the most impressive Pinterest collections in the world. He's a teacher and graphic artist in Vietnam, but he's done a really good job of just cataloguing so many artists' work. So go and have a look at his stuff on Pinterest. But on here he's just got loads of artists who've all done various work for different animation companies, different studios. Some are visual development artists, some are character artists, concept artists. There's a whole selection of stuff on here that's well worth checking out. But if we just look at a particular artist's work, I'll actually look at that. Here we go, some of the poses we were talking about. And when we think about these characters, even just something as simple as a subtle pose here, for Judy Hopps creates one line that's kind of an action line, so it's going down this way, and then the complexity here is just by an object kind of sticking out. It seems very kind of minimal, but it really does make a difference. Think about it, when you design a character, put the complex information on one side and simplistic information on another side. So these guys, good example. So the simple line here is this line, nice and simple. The complex line is the arm sticking out. Simple line here is this belly. Complex has got the tail sticking out. So just kind of keep that in your mind. When I design a pose and I design a position for my character, is there actually a complex and a simple? I'll show you, Jin Kim's stuff. He's quite good at that. Where are we? Just see that thing. If it's just got like his random stuff. Yeah. So even with very human characters, he'll try and focus on this idea of complex and simple. Simple line here on the right side, complex line on the left side. Yes, he's thinking, and a lot of his work as well. So Jin Kim is an example because he was a character. He's an artist who works across 2D and 3D, in that he designs 2D for 3D. Yes, he designs the poses, the positions, the performance, the characterization for 3D characters. So he works in sort of almost the opposite manner. But even within these, simple, right-hand side, complex on the left-hand side. So have a think about it. This one here, the simple is the fact that this is almost a straight line down the left-hand side, just straight down, legs to chest to shoulder, almost a straight line. Complex side, you've got a bit of changing of angles. So yeah, it's really, really something to think about and to consider. Simple, complex. It's primarily character-based. It does work in shots in general as well, like if you're designing whole kind of experiences. I saw Celine Kim up here somewhere as well. That's one that she's definitely worth looking at. Where are we? I'm going down, that's why it's not where I want to see. Sanders. Yeah, Elsa Chang's very good animation designer. But even within the designs, there's always that strive to try and find some sort of what we call asymmetry and simple and complex. So asymmetry is where we should avoid that, actually, this Sherlock design work, whatever this is here. Avoid matching character poses on both sides and instead aim for asymmetry, like this. So the characters are offset against one another. It's more feasible, it's just more doable as a design. Just to go all the way back to Milk Carl, because Milk Carl was the first example we looked at. Where are we? There he is. Milk Carl obviously was a 2D animator. In fact, yeah, let's just go back to that original source material. We looked at Robin Hood, didn't we? And even within these, so these are a combination of sketches to inform those poses and also the animations themselves. But you can see it within the posing of the animation. Simple lines, complex lines. Simple line here, complex down this side. So where you can, try and bring that into. Great example there for this bit of performance. That first pose, simple down the right-hand side, more complex down the left-hand side. Even in the posing here, now here's the simplicity, straight line, this side's the more complex side. Next pose there, simple now is across the top, complex is the underside. So think that this principle, it really does apply in almost all circumstances, and you can look at your posing and say, okay, do I have that? Well, I can tell you now, for these poses, the body positioning, because we were thinking 3D, yeah, the body positioning might be fine, but the perspective and the composition, so where I position the camera for that pose, is maybe where the problem is. Yeah, so if I turned the camera on these poses, would it give me that complex and simple to create a better piece of performance? Yeah, because I can see here, that's almost symmetrical. This one's almost symmetrical. And it's actually only on this one where it starts to play into it. Now I could do, if I wanted to amplify the complex simple theory for this pose, I could take the entire upper body and drag it over to the right. So he's not pulling straight upwards, but pulling off to one side. Yeah? And that would create the simple line here and the complex line down this side. So I'm thinking about those poses and those performances to get the mechanics right. These are better, okay, because I've got, this one's okay because it's hands to one side, so it creates complexity. You know, this stuff I could do. I mean, I think I quite like to move these feet, actually. I think I quite like to change those feet so they're almost like heeled together, like dead straight, and hands. I think that would work better, because then you create a real simple line down the left-hand side. So straight away I'm thinking about those mechanics and how I would transition from being dead straight to stepping back into that position where he's seeing something above him. So I'm thinking about that movement. So I think that one needs some adjustment. This one as well, I think it needs a little bit of adjustment. I'm trying to work out where the weight is, because this leg is off. He should be carrying the weight through his back leg, and he's not. He's still carrying it a bit through the front. So I might turn the angle of that foot so it's not got weight on it. And then this one, this is actually okay. Maybe do something with the feet because they're quite close to one another. They don't add a lot of depth. So maybe move the foot back a little bit to create a little bit more depth on this position. But actually you've got it. You've got a relatively smooth shape, and then you've got the complex shape, which is the fingers and those hands. So the pose isn't too bad. Now for 2D animation, at least now I've got an idea. Like I can open up TV Paint or Harmony and be like, okay, I know these poses now. I kind of know what the key components are of this movement, and all I've really got to do is figure out the timings for them. Yeah, get the actual motion, the interpolation correct. The alternative, just to go back to this, the alternative is to build your draftspersonship to such a level that you can just do it. Okay? The reason that the approach of artists 30, 40 years ago was to just draw your characters in all these poses, all these performances over and over and over again, thousands of times, until you understand the mechanics of how they move and how they behave. We don't have to do that now. Yeah, we don't have to do that. We can use other tech. We can use Maya to go in and go, what about this, 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 and this? Yeah, make up a few quick poses, then take it into 2D and start drawing over it and designing the shape and kind of amplifying the work a little bit better, kind of doing a bit more with it. So that's what we can do. That's the first thing to think about with body mechanics. We are going to start looking at this in more detail, and I want to really kind of push you guys to develop your knowledge to a much higher level. One of the ways to do that, is to just use lots of different tech. One of the ways I've started doing it, we can look at so Glenn Keane's another artist. He's done some really good examples of this level of posing. The Beast is a really interesting one because like Tarzan, he moves really unnaturally. So lots of work done. I mean, look at that. He's even going into skeleton and going, okay, what is the actual solid, solid, non-solid components? There it is. That was the drawing. Yeah. Well, the solid and non-solid components, so the rigid and the flexible components of these shapes. Where does he lead from? Where is his weight centered? And all those questions. But one of the things I've started doing is I've started using Quill. Doing it in VR has made a huge difference. It's just another tool. I'm still a 2D animator. I still work primarily in Toon Boom Harmony as my preference. But when I'm thinking about a character that's quite complex or a sequence of movement that is quite complex, but I really want to nail it, I find opening up a Quill and using like a VR headset, I can draw the character at life size, and that really helps my brain understand, where parts of their body move, how big of steps they take. And even just the thinking about it helps me then go to Toon Boom and draw it better because I've thought about it. Someone actually once told me that all of art is like 60% thinking. Yeah, 60% thinking, 40% actually doing. So that's all this Maya exercises are. It's not about learning Maya, it's about just using the tool to kind of develop different ways to do it. We're going to kind of keep going with this and look at it kind of at a greater length actually, especially when we go into some of the more advanced design stuff. And when we look at next year, I've got you guys for reinterpreted compositions, and we'll start looking at it there as well, like how we actually get a character in a shot, like how do we get them to fill space in order to make a design work or to make a shot work. So that's what I'd like you to do. Just to go back to this, and I know it seems like a really kind of strange off-kilter task, like you're going in this weird direction. But it would be very helpful to all of you, and it would be helpful to your development if you see this through. Sorry, I went too far there. Let's go up. Let's go back. Yeah, see it through. All 9 together, complete in Photoshop. So I went into Photoshop. I put all mine side by side just because that's how I like to work. But I would like you to go into Photoshop, lay them out side by side, and not just make the notes like I've done, but then actually on a new layer, do a draw over. Yeah, actually redraw the character in the pose that they would actually then do within your animation. So you use this as reference, use this as inspiration, and then created that kind of drawn keyframe almost. Okay, what I'm going to do, so where we were on Moodle, you know where you got the files from, I'm going to add a forum there, an open forum, and what I'd like you to do is work on this over the next week or so and add your finished like JPEG version of this onto Moodle so we can all see how each other have done it. How did you turn kind of an exercise in Maya of playing with body position and physicality, turn it into the planning for a sequence of movement, you know, and the actual, well, they're the keyframes, effectively. Okay, so that's kind of your task. No pressure on it, but I promise you, I swear, you will learn a lot from the doing. Yeah, just the thinking about it, you'll learn more about your characters and how they have to move. All right? Okay, you have got, so there's not another class in here, I think, until 2 o'clock. We are finished. If anyone needs any help for the last couple of minutes, just give me a shout and I can come and look at what you're doing. But yeah, we are more or less done. So what I have done, I've recorded all this, so you can go back. I'll put the video for this session onto that same space on Moodle, so you can go back and, you know, if you want to look through anything again, you're more than welcome to. And that PowerPoint as well with the notes in it, this one, I'll put that on Moodle as well for you. All right? Cool. Right, so let's...